Hello, it's Employee a Million, and welcome to my 2025 video output, not counting mouse comms. As usual, I end January with a Q&A, and let's get started pretty quickly. AJ Pearson Toon Paradise asks the first question, how'd you get started with YouTube? I'm not sure if this question has already been answered. I don't think it has, at least in a while. Basically, when I started YouTube, it was after I had already built a small presence on the internet. Back in 2016, I signed up into this SpongeBob forum called SpongeBuddy Mania, and I would discuss the show once in a while. And then I decided to just sort of do a whole thread reviewing the entire show in order from the first episode up to some of the newest seasons at the time. And throughout that, I sprinkled in little video reviews of some of the shorts that they made in the first 8 seasons. And that was basically my way of testing the waters for if people would be able to listen to me as much as they would want to read my text on a screen. And that was pretty fun. And eventually, once I had done enough seasons, I decided to make countdowns of my favorite and least favorite episodes of the early seasons because I really wanted to get back into talking about them again, and also just to get a good sense of what I wanted to do if I ever wanted to stop doing text reviews, which I haven't. I've gone back to SpongeBuddy Mania for season 13. What I'm getting at is YouTube should be something that you're passionate about. It should be about if you want to start a YouTube channel, you need to have built a passion for something already and use it as an outlet to share that passion. Platinum Rainforest asks, do you still plan on making a video explaining how shows usually peak in season 3s, or even a video explaining how shows usually start to decline in quality in season 6? It's a video topic that I've toyed with. I've tried writing it. I've gotten like a paragraph or two in sometimes. But the big problem is I will tend to repeat myself from when I'm doing videos where season 3s are the best. I'll just be making the same bullet points as in those. And I don't want to just make recycled content, so that's why the script gets harder to do with time, but also it's something that I want to get done before, it becomes impossible to do once I've got enough evidence built up already, but also before I can stop making new points in the video. Wacky Desert 53 asks, have you played any of the Nicktoon crossover games? Unite Series, All-Star Brawl, any of the racing games? I haven't played many of them, but I have seen footage and reviews and Let's Plays, and the one that I have poured the most time into is All-Star Brawl on the Switch, and that's a pretty okay Smash Brothers clone. I think the thing is with Nicktoon games is that they've never necessarily been AAA experiences, but that's fine. It's just something for kids to buy if they like the characters and if they like the genre of the game that they are playing. And when those come around every couple years, I think that's just fine. It adds more games to the canon of these characters, which is pretty fun. Island of Sodor Films asks, have you ever watched Thomas and Friends when you were a child? I'll just answer your second question because the first one always gets the same answer from me, eventually. Yes, I did. I did watch it on TV sometimes. I had a VHS of the Magic Railroad movie. I don't know if it holds up. I did have Thomas train sets, and I have heard that later iterations of Thomas have had their ups and downs, but it's always the 80s one that people are going to be going back to, so I don't want to act entitled, but I do feel a bit proud that that's the iteration that I watched the most on TV when I was a youngin'. Slacker Shrub asks, what non-movie Christmas special are you guys watching on Christmas morning this year? I'm watching Hey Hey It's Knishmas from Chowder. I watched the first 2 SpongeBob Christmas specials on Christmas Eve, and around that Christmas period I did watch some Christmas carols. Specifically, I'm surprised I watched all 3 of these, the Muppets Christmas Carol, the Animaniacs Christmas Carol, and the Doctor Who Christmas Carol, because you know me. New Master asks, what is your favorite of the public domain Mickey Mouse cartoons? Steamboat Willie is always fun to go back to. It is interesting how for the first time in at least 90 years, when that got public domain, it sort of became this renowned thing that everyone watched again. Like, that is the magic of the public domain, that, it spreads information. Other ones that I really like from the 1928 to 29 catalog are The Carnival Kid and Haunted House. Those are pretty interesting ones that I do like watching. Technically, The Mad Doctor is public domain, but only because of some failure to copyright it. But it isn't really part of Mickey's history yet. We'll have to wait a few years before that is truly fully expired or something. Darkride20 asks, "Hey Employee Million, I've been enjoying your series reviews for a few years now. I believe I discovered your channel around the time you uploaded the Fantastic Voyage episode ranking video, and distinctly remember listening to one you did on Foster's as I was working on an illustration back in 2023. As for my question, I released a game project a year ago that was inspired by adult animated sitcoms such as The Simpsons, and have been trying methods to help it take off. What do you think are the best ways of getting in with the SpongeBob analysis crowd?" Well, thank you for all of that, and Godspeed to both of the things you said. Godspeed to game development, because that is incredibly difficult from what I have seen, and Godspeed to SpongeBob analysis. I am lucky that I have been talking about SpongeBob for several years, because I kind of know what upsets people and what doesn't just by practice and by seeing it happen over the course of my time on the SpongeoNet. I guess my advice to someone who wants to analyze SpongeBob is know your history of the evolution of the series and when or why the character was created. It helps out a lot in basically any analysis context, especially with something as big as SpongeBob that so many people enjoy and want to learn something about. New Princess 2000 asks, "What were your favorite preschool or younger children's shows growing up?" I think what I mean is anything that's preschool to first and second grade. It's hard to fully describe. I know it is hard to fully describe, but I did mention Thomas the Tank Engine a little while ago. Blue's Clues and Dora the Explorer were other ones, as was Little Einsteins. I can't remember too much of what I watched in like the Playhouse or Nick Jr. areas, but I do remember watching shows aimed at older kids, and that's basically what my channel is about, and I am happy to keep on indulging in that nostalgia. Rebel Friend asks, "Are there any episodes you've declared the best or worst of a show in previous reviews, but have since changed your mind and think something else is the best or worst?" I know that opinions are able to be changed and evolve with time, but I haven't done a full rewatch on too many of the shows that I have talked about and thought of seriously changing my mind on what's the best or worst episode, but I do have SpongeBob to fall back on, because two of my very least favorite episodes are Pal for Gary and SpongeBob You're Fired. They kind of flip-flop in my head on which I think I dislike the most, because there are so many reasons to dislike both of those episodes. And depending on how I'm feeling, the reasons the Pal for Gary is worse can stick out more in my mind than the reasons SpongeBob You're Fired is worse, but it kind of depends. I'll probably need to watch them back to back for hours and hours to finally come to a conclusion. By then I'll be insane. Spongy the Editor asks, "Did you ever announce your next Disney TVA review somewhere?" No, because I don't know what I'm doing after Gravity Falls. It probably is going to be from the Disney Afternoon era, but another reason that I have fallen behind and had to take a break from making videos is that I've fallen behind a little bit in my production pipeline. So I don't necessarily have a Disney show on the docket at the moment, but I do think that when I get back into the swing of things with Disney, it will be something from the Afternoon era, because it is too ironic that it's been Quack Pack so long. That's my only real dip into that era for them. Something has to change sometime. Zach Sphere asks, "What are some of your favorite genres of music, and who's your favorite music artist?" I guess I'm a pretty vanilla guy. I like pop, namely from the 70s and 80s, like disco, new wave, house. Besides that, I guess my favorite artist pick is a chalky one, the Beatles, mainly from their psychedelic period, even though that's a little harder than my 70s and 80s tastes, and pretty much anything made today that harkens back to those sounds. But other favorite artists are stuff from that time, like ABBA, Queen, Earth, Wind and Fire, Elton John. Just sort of very lively and happy music with a good beat and instrumentals. I know the 80s is a little bit more synthetic than the 70s sound, but that's why I like to alternate. 80s has a bit more of a futuristic sound, while 70s has a more classical sound. Pizzaroli asks, EAM, do you intend to return to Amino someday to do more reviews of seasons of adult cartoons like you had done with some seasons of South Park and Family Guy? The trouble with that is I can't return to Amino even if I wanted to, not because I got banned or left or anything, but just simply because the app stopped working for me one day. That was my cue that, I didn't have much to cover at the moment that I couldn't cover on my YouTube channel, so I just decided to go back to making YouTube videos. I don't think I have enough time to cover animation on an episode-by-episode basis, unless it's SpongeBob for SpongeBob Mania again. But I do want to get into King of the Hill. I have seen a couple more episodes now. I have seen the Boggle episode, and that is a very good one. But yeah, that was a chapter of my Employee a Million career that is over, at least for now. Coco0322 asks, what are shows you didn't think you would like until you gave them a fair chance? Even though I knew that they weren't bad shows at all, some 2000s comedy-centric ones like The Grim Adventures of Billy and Mandy and The Penguins of Madagascar, just because I thought, are these going to be too immature for me now that I'm all grown up? And I just thought, no, they still have some pretty good jokes in them. I think that they deserve to have adult fans who grew up on them. I'm not saying that they're perfect, but it was interesting to see what parts of them held up, like what parts are like, this is genuinely good comedy, and thankfully it was most of it. Zoro Bunalanda asks, have you watched any board-driven Patrick Star Show episodes? Unfortunately, I haven't watched much Patrick Star Show in general. My opinion on it hasn't changed. It's like, if they want a much zanier show in the SpongeBob universe to siphon some of that post-sequel zaniness into it, then by all means. But I don't think I have seen enough to know the difference between a writer-driven and board-driven one. It would be pretty exciting to see more SpongeBob material that goes back to the board-driven style of the first 8.5 seasons, just to see, how much different the action is compared to how they do it now. Z-Man Squizzes asks, who are your top 5 favorite cartoon characters? Gosh, just off the top of my head, SpongeBob is one of my very favorite cartoon characters. And in terms of favorite shows, you've got The Simpsons. I think Lenny is still my favorite Simpsons character. In terms of, classical cartoon characters, I don't think that there's any more fascinating to watch and assess than Daffy Duck from Looney Tunes, because he went through a major personality change, but it was a very organic one that fit the way that his personality and his role in the shorts changed as Bugs Bunny grew in popularity. I can't really think of two others that, have left that big of an impact on me, but those are my top 3 at the moment. I'll see what I think next year. The Movie and Cartoon Fan asks, what is a show you refuse to review? One that I said way back in 2019 that I will not review, and I have held on to my promise, is Ren and Stimpy Adult Party Cartoon. And for pretty serious reasons, not because it's just this abomination that has no redeeming qualities. Far from it. It's just that knowing the creator makes it so much more difficult to find any reason to assess it and give it a platform. And even with the original Ren and Stimpy show, there were enough creative voices in the room where you can feel them in that show. But whereas with Adult Party Cartoon, it is just so concentrated John K that it feels like he's projecting all of his traumas onto you, and that just makes for an uncomfortable experience, which is why I'm saying what I feel about it here, but I am not giving it the time of day as a big old analysis of what it got wrong and maybe like the one or two things it got right. The Mr. Man asks, what's one show you've reviewed you think you were too harsh on or weren't harsh enough on? One of the harshest ones that I think I was too harsh on was Inspector Gadget. I still feel that it is not a show that you should marathon, but I marathoned it, and that showed in how I criticized how formulaic it is. Shows that I don't think I was harsh enough on, two that come to mind are ironically Cartoon Network shows. Like, I know that I tried not to make it too obvious that that was the one of the three I watched the least as a kid, but here we are. Two that I think I should have been harsher on were Camp Lazlo, which I still enjoy, but yeah, that toilet humor got very pervasive, especially towards the end, and Ben 10 Alien Force, which I didn't really go into why I fell out of love with Ben 10 as I was watching that, and I kind of glazed over some of the context behind the show and the story within it. I got a few things wrong, actually, so when I get to Ultimate Alien, which should be at some point this year, I will try to rectify a few things and close out that era of the series on a more earnest and well-thought-out note. Jaden Julia asks, had CatDog become the next Rugrats, what would happen to it in SpongeBob, the show that met the title and more? I think in that alternate history, I think CatDog would have become the Teen Titans Go of Nickelodeon. Not the most hated show ever, but just something that people just rub their temples wondering, why is it still on? Why is it going on so long? I think the Loud House is kind of that too, if you want to be a bit more negative on the Loud House. And I think in that alternate timeline, SpongeBob would have probably run around the same length as Rocko's Modern Life or the Ren and Stimpy show, just sort of been a 4 short seasons and then poof. I don't think it would have had the massive impact that it did, but it would be considered a cult classic. Anonymous asks, what are your thoughts on Bob's Burgers? It's a show I think you will like. I've never actually been asked about Bob's Burgers, but I do know people who enjoy it, who will bring it up in random discussion, but like King of the Hill, it just feels a bit too American for me. Joseph Stapleton asks, what are your thoughts on The Annoying Orange? It wasn't very good, but I don't think it was ever designed to fall under any sort of definition of good. At most, it was the sort of thing you sent to your friend if you hated them that day. I have no idea how it got a TV show. That is just shocking that it got a TV show, that it was that popular, and executives saw something in it. Let's always hold that against them. Sparkling with Knights asks, I know you're not an anime guy, but is there any anime series that you've ever thought about really wanting to watch and appreciate? One I've always had in the back of my mind is Neon Genesis Evangelion. I've thought of just reviewing that out of nowhere, but about a year or two ago, I kind of spoiled myself because I saw the clip of the third impact in the ending movie, and I think I've seen the best bit. That part is just really funny, and I don't know how they can top that comedically, so yeah, it'll be a very interesting experience whenever I get around to, sitting down and watching all of Evangelion, if I ever want to. Patrick Lauer asks, will you review that Timo Supremo show, considering you make that theme song a recurring gag, which I find funny? This is the one, will you review this or that I will answer, and I've never actually had any serious thought about reviewing Timo Supremo. Not just because I think 1 or 2 episodes is still lost, but also because I just want that theme song to be its impact on this channel at the moment. Whenever I'm talking about Disney shows from the early to mid 2000s, I will try and find a way to put that theme song in, and it'll probably annoy someone. It's just a stupid theme song, and that's why I like it. That's why I like that little part in it, and why I am honoring that. I don't think I've even seen a full episode. That's just my exposure to it, and probably how I'm exposing it to the world, and it's probably the only thing someone knows about that show, and I am proud. TM Fuentes asks, "Hey Employee Million, I've noticed that you haven't made a worst cartoon episodes list since 2020. In fact, I've only seen you do the traditional best cartoon episodes list since then, actually. What's up with that?" Well, there's two reasons I don't really want to do worst cartoon episodes lists at this point anymore. Maybe some other day I might. The first one is I don't want to be considered a Mr. Negative channel. I do try to keep my reviews as positive as possible, and there's enough negativity on YouTube as it is, so I know worst lists get more views. I have learnt that. But I do want to be a constructive critic rather than a destructive critic, which is very easy to do when you're reviewing negatively all the time. Plus, since I dislike or flat out hate most of the episodes on those lists, I don't really want to be stuck rewatching and writing and editing about them for a week or more again, because, when I've stated what my least favorite is in a review, it's like, okay, that's the last I need to think about that. But if I did negative worst list end of year videos, then it'll just be bringing back things that I don't really love about these shows, when I do want to honor what I've watched at the end of the year. So that's why I don't do worst lists anymore, and why I don't really try to make too many negative videos. There's just enough of it on the internet as it is. Rafiq Huda asks, "All grown up when?" Since September 23rd, 2019. Engage Emotions asked, "I noticed a lot of your older videos now say old on them. Is there any reason you decided to indicate that on certain videos?" Specifically with some of my 2019 reviews, it's because I go back and I rewatch them and I say a thing or two in them that I don't think I would disagree with nowadays, but I would say it differently just for sensitivity reasons. I don't disown those videos or anything. I'm not going to take them down or re-review them. I just want people to know that I made those quite a while ago, and there are more modern videos of mine that they should check out instead of these ones. These are what you should watch just to see how I got started, which is why I've thought of just tagging a lot of my 2018 and 2019 videos with the year that they were released in, but I haven't gotten around to it, but it is something that I might do. And lastly, Comic Book Guy has given me quite a task. Which episode from each season of South Park do you think best represents the style of the season, whether it is good, meh, or a bad episode from the seasons you've seen so far? The tricky thing with South Park is that for a pretty long time, especially in their middle period, they tried to make every episode in a season or every half season or so feel like a very different show, which gives the show a lot of variety, but it also makes it harder to, distinguish what season they're from a little bit. But I have tried, and I've got a little list with me to help me refresh my memory. I'm only going up to season 17. I have seen up to season 25, but I do want to focus on the pre-story arc seasons just for brevity. Season 1, my pick was Volcano because it was the first or second episode that they produced after they got picked up, and you do need to watch it to understand how South Park started. It is very slow-paced, and it is crude, but not in a way that you can understand how it caused such a ruckus back in 97. Season 2, I picked Chicken Lover because it is starting to get a little more character-focused and a little funnier, but it is still, pretty basic by what we currently consider South Park. Season 3, I picked Sexual Harassment Panda because that is just a very silly idea, and they were getting a bit silly now, and they were getting a little bit more satirical, but not as much as in later seasons. Season 4, I picked Timmy 2000 because, hey, they're starting to flesh out the supporting cast now. They're getting kind of a new supporting cast now, and they're still continuing down that satirical road. Season 5, I picked Scott Tenorman Must Die because it's my most viewed video. Thank you. Season 6, I picked The Return of the Fellowship of the Ring to the Two Towers. Not only because you just look at what it's referencing and you can tell this was the same year that they were making Season 6 of South Park. This was a very 2002 coded episode in terms of the subject matter, but also just because it sort of hints at a story arc that's going on every once in a while. For Season 7, I picked Casa Bonita because I think by this point it had fully codified that Cartman had become a complete sociopath and Butters had become his crony. And I think that is a classic Cartman Butters episode. For Season 8, I picked Good Times with Weapons, not just because it's a classic, but also because you can start to see them play around a little bit more with the animation, which I think sort of started to be at odds with South Park's traditionally very primitive animation style, but I might have more of my piece on that another day. Season 9, I picked Trapped in the Closet because that was the most controversial episode up to that point and possibly ever. And I think of Season 9 as a very controversial season in terms of subject matter and reactions to the show. For Season 10, I picked Hell on Earth 2006 because I think it's about that time where South Park had gotten so edgy that there are some jokes in there that are like, man, that's a bit too far. You're lucky that you've built up goodwill, but man, that is a bit too far. I could see why Steve Irwin's family was upset by that. Imagination Land is the one that I picked for Season 11 because I think of 11 as a very goofy season. Like, it's not as edgy or satirical as 9 and 10, and I think that really helped it out with the Imagination Land trilogy in particular. For Season 12, I picked Overlogging because it is one of the big Randy episodes of that season, and it is around that point that Randy is sort of starting to become the main character of the show, which has mixed reactions, but I think this episode is funny in its sadistic way. For Season 13, I picked Dead Celebrities because there really wasn't too much from Season 13 that was really sticking out to me. Otherwise, maybe The Coon, but that sort of evolves into a better trilogy in Season 14. And for Season 14, I picked The Tale of Scrody McBoogerballs because it is sort of starting a discussion about what edgy stuff means, and I think that was a sign that South Park was coming of age, that they were reflecting on this is just the most vile thing possible. What was the point of this all? For Season 15, I picked You're Getting Old because that is the episode that everyone remembers from Season 15. It definitely didn't affect everything going forward. They took back a lot of that stuff, unfortunately, in the follow-up episode. But it is definitely a reflection on how long the show had been on at that point. And you can definitely see them thinking, we've got to start to change things up, which they did start to do in the coming years. For Season 16, I picked Cash for Gold because that shopping channel bit always makes me laugh. It is one of those weird South Park jokes that is simultaneously really lighthearted but also insanely dark. It has this really good mesh, and it must be painfully relatable for anyone in Stan's situation. And the rest of the episode around that joke, it does really hold up. There is something that it's saying. And for Season 17, I picked Goth Kids 3, Dawn of the Posers. It is a fairly underrated episode, and one of the last times for a while that they were just sort of doing whatever they felt like that week rather than constantly looking at the news. So I sort of see that as the end of some of the breeziest days for the show. Once again, thank you for answering these questions, and I'll see you all next year for the 2026 Q&A. Goodbye for now. Harvey Beaks is, of course, about a character called Harvey Beaks. He lives in a woodland town called Little Bark Grove and hangs out with the local children, but mostly these two imps, Fee and Foo, raised by themselves in the forest. Harvey comes from a different background to them, growing up following rules and acting on his best behavior. But Fee and Foo never follow anyone's rules, not even their own. Much of the show is them all getting in and out of trouble, but sometimes, funnily enough, the trouble is caused by Harvey's unbelievable goodliness. You can see why this premise was appealing to Nickelodeon on a conceptual level. During their heyday, their marketing strategy was to push a kids-first attitude with wild and messy activities. While this strategy was downplayed by the mid-2000s, it's still baked into the general public's understanding of the network. So to have a show that teaches the importance of breaking out of your comfort zone with the promise that most of the main trio are wild and messy kids, that's an ideal way to keep the Nickelodeon spirit alive and prominent in the show.